Disclaimer. What can get through a magical shield? J.K. Rowling.
So what did the curse actually do to her? Hermione asked in the next alchemy lesson. I mean, floating 6 feet in the air doesn't exactly correlate with instant death, and she was screaming in agony, but we didn't see any physical injuries even after it was over.
Dumbledore looked considerably older and more worn today as he faced the class, now with just 9 people in it. He regarded them sadly and said,
"This being the alchemy class, and the closest class we offer to the study of curses of that sort, I will tell you, since forewarned is forearmed in the end. I'm trusting you not to use this information irresponsibly."
He fixed his gaze on each of them in turn.
"I will also give anyone who wishes to leave this conversation the opportunity to do so."
No one left, although a couple of the Ravenclaws looked like they were thinking about it.
"Very well. It was curses, Miss Granger, plural," he replied. "The levitation curse was merely for show, I believe, to make Miss Chang more visible and to make an example of her. As for the rest, I'm afraid it was nerve damage. A sort of mingled killing curse and cruciatus curse that burns the nervous system from the inside out in seconds, leaving no mark on the body, infused into the necklace by a dark ritual, one which I shall not elaborate. I'm afraid there was nothing you could have done for her, Miss Granger, despite your admirable efforts."
That answered most of Hermione's questions. In a way, it could have been worse, knowing as she did that there were curses out there that could affect one's entire bloodline, but it was still horrific. But even so, there was one thing that was still nagging at her.
"Professor," she said, "something doesn't make sense about that necklace, just from the fact that it exists, really. I mean, that curse seems like massive overkill, like it was 100 times more powerful than it needed to be. If just brushing across the back of her hand was enough to kill her, it would have been impossible to actually wear it, which kind of defeats the purpose, and it would be impossible to cover up. The trail of bodies it would leave—"
She saw everyone staring at her worriedly and trailed off. She gazed down at her desk in embarrassment.
"I'm sorry," she said. "I get like this when things don't add up. I can't let them go." "I do understand your confusion, Miss Granger. Do not worry," Dumbledore replied kindly. "You are right. There would seem to be little practical use for a cursed object that deadly, even for a truly evil person. And yet people do make them. In my experience there are 2 possible reasons for it, neither necessarily wicked, but both highly questionable and very dangerous. The first reason is an overzealous anti-theft curse for a display piece, or, more commonly, a tomb, where it is not intended ever to be moved, much less worn. And the second is as a proof of concept, merely to show that they can do it. Nonetheless, such items all too often fall into evil hands."
Dumbledore answered a few more questions from the class before beginning the lesson. Hermione still wasn't caught up on recent events, having been away from the castle, but she waited till class was over to finish the discussion since. She came up to Dumbledore as the others left and said, "Excuse me, Professor, but I haven't been here since Saturday, and I don't trust the newspapers. Can you tell me what the investigation turned up? How it happened?"
"Of course, Hermione," he answered. "We know that Mr. Diggory and Miss Chang were on a date at Madame Puddifoot's before the incident. Mr. Diggory reported that Miss Chang was behaving oddly after visiting the washroom in the tea shop, and was carrying a package back to the castle that she did not have before. While we cannot be absolutely certain, I strongly believe that she was imperioused by Madame Puddifoot herself in the washroom."
"Madame Puddifoot?" Hermione gasped. She'd never heard her name mentioned in any way in connection with the Death Eaters.
"Upon questioning, Madame Puddifoot began behaving oddly, and we discovered that she was also imperioused. Unfortunately, her memory of the event is not clear. She did not know who cursed her, or when, nor does she even remember her interaction with Miss Chang clearly. I'm afraid the trail goes cold with her."
Well, that was worrying.
"How far does that go?" she asked. "Could Voldemort imperious everyone through a chain like that?" "Fortunately not. Even 2 degrees of separation is difficult. An imperious curse cast by someone who is already imperioused will last only a short while. and it is likely that had Miss Cheng been ordered to cast it on a third person, she would not have been able to do it. It was just enough for her to attempt to bring the cursed necklace to me, a plan that would undoubtedly have failed regardless. She felt a chill go through her. "So someone was trying to kill you?" she said. "Hermione, that is hardly a surprise," Dumbledore said. "What is surprising is that it was such a half-hearted assassination attempt, which tragically claimed the life of a student." He stopped at that, and she soon realized he didn't want to say more on the subject. "What about the necklace, sir?" She tried to angle for a little more. "Do you know where it came from?" "It is still under investigation, Hermione. I will inform you if there is anything else you need to know." "That's all he would tell me," she told Harry at dinner. "I think he knows more, but he's not saying."
"He does," Harry said. "He wouldn't tell us any more either, but I already told him I saw that necklace before."
"You did? Where? When?"
4 years ago in Borgin and Burke's. Remember that time I came out the wrong flue? It was there in the shop."
"So a Death Eater bought it from there and passed it on to Madame Puddifoot?"
"I think it was Malfoy," Harry said.
"Malfoy?"
Hermione said. She thought back to Saturday. That didn't add up at all.
"Why? And, more importantly, how? He was talking to us when it happened."
"He could have embarrassed Madame Puddifoot before that, though. And he was acting weird on Saturday. Maybe it was a distraction, or he was setting up an alibi." Hermione thought for a minute. It could fit, and it was devious enough for him, but they had no real evidence.
"I dunno," Ron said. "I think it sounds pretty half-baked myself. I mean, really, Malfoy trying to kill Dumbledore?"
"He definitely would if he could," Harry pointed out.
"Well, sure, but there's no way he could pull it off." "That's a good point," Hermione said. "Dumbledore told me there was no way that plan could have worked."
"That doesn't mean it wasn't him," Harry insisted.
"I'm not saying you're wrong, Harry, but anyone could have bought that necklace in the past 4 years. We can't prove anything."
"Why not? That necklace—"
"Harry, even if Malfoy was behind it, and even if Borgin kept accurate records, which he probably didn't, if Malfoy was smart, he would have had a third party buy it and pass it to him, especially with all the dark detectives scanning everything coming into the castle."
Harry pressed his lips into a thin line, trying to reason his way out of that. "There's got to be something," he said.
Ginny nudged him with her elbow. "Hey, cheer up," she said. "We'll figure something out. Have you figured out where he's sneaking off to yet?"
"No, I haven't."
"Sneaking off?"
Hermione asked. "Malfoy's been disappearing a lot of the time," Harry said. "It was weird seeing him in Hogsmeade, because I've hardly seen him around otherwise. I think he's up to something." That sounded a little obsessive, Hermione thought. Although it was true, Malfoy had liked being the center of attention in past years. A change in behavior could mean something.
"I suppose I could ask Daphne and Tracy if they know anything," she suggested. "I don't know if they'd tell me even if they do, though."
"Yeah, maybe. Hey, wait, doesn't your version of the Marauders map let you track people's movements?"
Hermione's face brightened. "Yes, it does."
"Can you have it follow Malfoy around for a couple of days?"
"Sure, that's easy. It won't really tell you what he was doing when, but it'll show if he goes anywhere strange or leaves the castle. I'll tell you on Friday what it shows."
"Great. Thanks, Hermione." 4 days earlier.
"That was a very foolish move, little Dwarky." I'm doing my best, Aunt Bella," Draco said. "Are you?" Bellatrix Lestrange asked, stepping out from her place in the shadows. "Your plan failed, and failed badly." "The chain girl? No one can prove that was me. Hell, you can't prove it was—" He stopped as Bellatrix lunged towards him and put her wand to his throat. "Don't lie to me, Draco. You're still piss-poor at it," she hissed. "That was a stupid plan, and it had you written all over it." It wasn't stupid. Dumbledore wasn't even at the school today. And could a cursed necklace like that really get past their pet squib? She walked around him, tracing her wand around his neck like the point of a knife. "And even if it did, Dumbledore's not dumb enough not to check it for curses himself. All you did was get a student killed." "She was a half-blood, and one of Dumbledore's stupid army," Draco insisted. No great loss." "You attracted attention," Bellatrix said. "Attention that you can't afford right now. The Aurors will be even more on guard from now on. You have no allies in the school besides those lumps you call minions and the Parkinson bint. I am not convinced of Snape's loyalty. He would not make the unbreakable vow to protect you, not even when dear Sissy begged him. He's a spy. He can't afford... Or he's hedging his bets. He's served Dumbledore 4 times longer than he served the Dark Lord. Who knows what happened during that time? I don't care what book he gave you or what fancy spells. Do not trust him." She backed off and took a deep breath. "I'm doing this as a favor to your mother, Draco. As far as I'm concerned, you haven't earned that mark on your arm, not by a long shot. But I still love my sister, and she asked me to keep you alive. Do not make this job any harder for me." "That wasn't my only plan," he insisted. "It better not have been. The Dark Lord is not pleased." Draco's blood ran cold. "What?" he whispered. "What? What?" Bellatrix said in a false little girl voice. "What, little Dwarky? Your plan was doomed to failure, and you attracted unwanted attention to yourself. The Dark Lord knows, and he wonders if you are really trying." Looking very pale now, Draco tried to rally. I am trying. I'm working on a way to get past the security. I do that, and it'll be easy to overpower him in the school. We can surround him with no apparition. He's too dedicated to protecting his precious students to run." Bellatrix tilted her head. "Huh," she said. "That could actually work. But you'd better not blow it, Dwarky. You don't need me to tell you you don't want to screw up again. Now tell me more about this plan of yours." Hermione waited for Professor Jones to escort her back to the gate after supper, but to her surprise it seemed Jones had other ideas. "Miss Granger, I'd like to speak to you in my office for a few minutes," she said. Okay," Hermione said warily, resolving to stay alert. Yes, Jones was an Order member, but she was also the defense professor, and was acting just a little oddly. It was hard to be too paranoid these days. However, Jones calmly sat down at her desk and motioned for her to sit across from her. "I've been thinking about the spells you taught that secret club of yours last year, Granger," she said. "Well, it was more Harry than me." "I meant the ones you invented," Jones said snappishly. "Oh, those. What about them?" "Astoria Greengrass tells me that you taught her as well." "Sure, for a little while. Why?" "I'm aware of Miss Greengrass's fragile condition, Miss Granger. She consistently performs well below her grade level at practical magic, especially in exercises where endurance is required. And yet you were able to teach her spells that increased her effectiveness in my class significantly. Spells that are apparently suitable for second-year students?" "Yes, because they're more efficient," Hermione said. "Professor, I don't understand what you're driving at." Honestly, it wasn't just tonight. Professor Jones had been behaving oddly towards her all year, cold and almost spiteful for no apparent reason. Why was she taking such an interest now? "Granger, I want you to come in and teach some of the younger classes," Jones said. Hermione blinked in disbelief. That was the last thing she expected. "Teach some of your classes?" she said. "But why? I'm not qualified to teach." "And you think I am, Granger? Let me tell you a secret. No one's been qualified for this job in the past 10 years." "What? That can't be. Remus was—" "A werewolf," Jones interrupted. "Qualified in defense, but not actually qualified as a teacher. Moody was the same, even if he hadn't been a fake. Quirrell did his walkabout, but he never actually got a certificate in the subject. It's the same story every year. It doesn't matter if you're not certified. The important thing is that you can teach. And you've got tricks up your sleeve that the younger students can use that the curriculum doesn't. You could be a real asset." "Oh, well, I'm flattered, Professor, but I wouldn't want to impose. You're the teacher, after all. I could just show you my spellbook instead." "Granger, if I wanted to see your spellbook, I'd have asked to see your spellbook," Jones snapped. "You think I want this job? The position's cursed. And I never had any interest in teaching anyway. I'm only here because I got bumped down to a desk job when I lost my arm. And then, since I was the only person Dumbledore trusts who was expendable, I got stuck here. The least you can do is take over a few shifts for me." "What? What do you mean, the least I can do?" Hermione demanded. "I mean you owe me, Granger!" Jones shouted. "Don't you remember how I lost my arm? Thorfinn Rowell cursed it off while I was on guard duty with the Prime Minister. Guard duty I was only on because you made Emmeline Vance miss her shift."
Hermione gasped.
You were... Professor, I had no idea. No one ever told me," she said. "Well, now you know," Jones said waspishly. "Maybe next time you should think about the consequences of your actions." "Ma'am, I am so sorry. I didn't know anything about the shift schedules or anything. I was just trying to help Harry." "We keep Potter safe, Granger. We set our plans for a reason. You don't get to change them just because you want your friend to come out to play." "It wasn't like that. It wasn't just to give him freedom of movement. I gave Harry an extra layer of protection, legal protection." Her voice turned hard. "Protection he needed last year when the guards weren't enough."
Protection that wasn't entirely legal in itself, she reminded herself, but that was already an open secret within the Order, so that wasn't really the issue.
"Look, I'm really sorry this happened to you, but I don't know what would have happened if Emmeline Vance had gone on her shift, and neither do you. She wasn't a qualified Auror, was she?" "That's not the point. Did you ever think to ask Dumbledore about it instead of just doing it?"
Hermione opened her mouth to rebuke her, to say that she wasn't part of the Order and didn't have to answer to them, that Dumbledore wouldn't have gone for it because it was technically illegal, that she didn't fully trust him because of his own screw-ups. But her words died on her lips. Maybe Dumbledore wasn't an option, but there still were other people she could have talked to, even with her parents keeping her on a short leash. Her head dropped.
"You're right," she said. "I had other options. I just got so used to having to do everything myself last year because no one was being cooperative that I didn't think about it. I don't regret doing what I did to help Harry, but I'm sorry you got hurt because of it. I wish I could do more for you. I learnt left-handed casting a while back. I don't know if I could help you at all with that. But if you show me the schedule, I'll talk to my parents about guest lecturing."
After copying down Jones' schedule, Hermione left as fast as she could. She felt sick. She made it off the grounds, but it was a near thing. As soon as she apparated home, she collapsed in tears and probably scared her parents half to death. She told them what had happened, and how terrible she felt about it, but they unfortunately didn't have any clear answers for her. They were more sympathetic to her side of the story, given all the things she'd told them last year about Dumbledore's and the Ministry's mistakes, but they also agreed with her assessment that she could have done more to make sure no one else got hurt. It was a complicated issue. Mum and Dad had never been entirely comfortable with the way she was skirting the law, even though they disagreed with the law itself. Some amount of sneaking around was probably necessary, they said, but they also wanted her to own up to her actions, even though they didn't care for her being away from home more. She failed to come to a decision that night, still torn up over what had happened. It wasn't until she went to Grimmauld Place the next day that she got a second opinion from Sirius. "Look, I'm not saying you were totally in the right, Hermione," he said. "I'm definitely glad you went out of your way to help Harry with the trace, but she's right that you should have consulted us first. I would have gone along with it, even helped you, but that was a low blow for her to guilt you like that. Hestia didn't have to cover Emmeline's shift. Kingsley could have done it. Hell, I could have done it. She knew the risks. And you're right about one thing. Emmeline's not an Auror. She probably would have gotten killed in that fight, not just lost an arm, and Hestia knows it."
"So what should I do?"
she asked.
"My advice, if your parents are okay with it, go and do some lectures. Hestia might be crossing the line a little, but it'll be better if you resolve the fight quickly, and you'll be helping the kids anyway. Don't let her walk all over you, though. Remember, she's the teacher, not you, and you're already spending all your time on school and order stuff as it is. I can tell it's wearing on you. You need to take care of yourself, too." "Thanks, Sirius," she sighed. "I'll think about that."
And that was how Hermione Granger found herself facing Georgina Vector's third-year Slytherin Hufflepuff defense class the following Wednesday. She and Professor Jones had worked out a schedule where she could lecture to all 8 classes for the first 4 years in the space of a few weeks, either by coming early to her regular lessons or staying overnight to the next day. That would mean less traveling and less time in the castle, which her parents appreciated. The mathematician's map had revealed that Malfoy was regularly sneaking off to the Room of Requirement. What he was doing there, they had no idea. Harry had tried to follow him, but Malfoy apparently had enough understanding of the room to seal it to intruders, which was worrying in itself.
"Good morning," she told the class. "For those of you who don't know, my name is Hermione Granger. I'm an arithmancer by trade,
more or less.
But Professor Jones asked me to give a guest lecture today because I've been working on new defense techniques for younger students."
"You're not a professor," one of the Slytherins objected.
"Professor Jones said I'm in charge today, so right now, I am," she replied.
"You haven't even graduated yet," the boy shot back. "And you're Muggle-born. What do you know?" his friend said.
"Shut up!" Georgina said. "Hermione's brilliant. She taught defense before, and she's fought actual Death Eaters, and they came off the worse."
A hush fell over the classroom. Anyone who had been out there not just fighting, but winning, commanded respect. Hermione hoped she looked the part. At considerable effort, she'd made another change to her wardrobe over the weekend, buying a trench coat that superficially resembled Auror robes and adding her bulletproof lining to it. With that and her sword, ideally, she would look less like a student and more like a fighter, and thus more like a plausible defense tutor.
"Thank you, Georgina," she told the class. "Yes, I have taught and fought before. If you've been paying any attention at all at Hogwarts, you've heard of Dumbledore's Army."
She'd never really cared for that name.
"I know several of you had older siblings who were part of it, and—"
She looked questioningly at Georgina, who got the message and nodded.
"I was in it," the younger girl said, "and I wasn't the only Slytherin. Hermione and Harry Potter were teaching us defense, and they were good at it."
That got the rest of the Slytherins' attention. A couple of them still didn't look happy, but they were willing to listen.
"Okay, then," Hermione said. "As Miss Vector said, I was teaching defense to a number of students last year, and Professor Jones asked me to come and lecture about some of the defensive spells I invented myself. I've made some special effort to develop a few spells that younger students can cast easily. Yes, Miss," she consulted the seating chart, "Corner?" "Can third-year spells really help against a Death Eater, Miss Granger?" the Ravenclaw girl said. "Couldn't they just shield against all of them?" "Excellent question," Hermione replied. She remembered a line from Larry Niven. What can get through a General Products Hall? Gravity. It was much the same principle here. "What can get through a magical shield?" she asked. "Unforgivable curses," one of the students said. "Good. What else?" "Powerful dark curses." "Good. What else?" Muggle guns?" "No, at least not the kind of guns Muggles typically use. Obviously, if they turn a cannon on you, a Protego won't save you. But what else can go through it?" The class was silent for a minute, trying to think of something else simple that would fit the bill, until one of the Ravenclaw boys got the right answer. "Light, ma'am." "Yes, another." "Heat." "Yes, another." "Sound." "Yes, and there are more, but those are the ones you need to know. Light and sound can go through most magical shields. Normally this is what you want, but it is still a weakness that can be exploited. When concentrated, light and sound can be very effective against an enemy. Observe." She turned her wand on a training dummy in the corner and cast Extonio. The class jumped, and one or two of them screamed when they saw the spell explode with a blinding flash and a loud crack when it struck home. "The Flashbang Hex," she explained. "It won't cause much injury even without a shield, but it's extremely disorienting to the eyes and ears. And since light and sound can go through most shields, it remains effective even when it's blocked, whereas most other spells don't. And it's very easy to cast. It's barely more complicated than an Incendio. With such low-power spells, it's all about exploiting weaknesses like that, or else finding new applications for spells or more efficient techniques to cast them. Some are simple, like the Flashbang Hex, and some require a lot of technical knowledge to create. And unfortunately, the burning laser charm is probably a little too advanced for this class, but I have a few other tricks up my sleeve. Here's another trick for you. Psychological warfare. Lamenta!
There was another simple one. She aimed her wand above their heads when she cast it, but the directional whinging jinx spread out in a wide cone, and about half the class clapped their hands over their ears. She swept her arm from side to side so they could all get the effect before she cut it off.
That was a whinging jinx, she explained. Completely harmless, but very annoying. I just took a drone jinx, made it produce several dissonant notes in the highest octave of the piano, where human ears are especially sensitive, and I made it directional so I wouldn't get caught in it. Instant nails on a blackboard. The wand motion is a little funny to get the dissonant notes right, but it should be well within your capabilities. These kinds of spells may not sound like much, but if they can disorient your enemy and buy you a little bit of time, they just might save your life.
Most of the class didn't know the first thing about spellcrafting, so most of that didn't mean much to them, but it wasn't hard for them to pick up the spells she showed them, which convinced the last holdouts pretty well. She was comforted more than she expected to know that the younger students wouldn't be completely helpless. Maybe she was doing some good here. Hermione reflected that Mum and Dad were more nervous about her visiting Hogwarts because of her history there, and Cho's death, but it was objectively more dangerous going to and from her lessons at the Burrow and headquarters out in public. This went double on Halloween. She probably shouldn't have been out at all that day, but she'd been putting off going to the bank, and she wanted to check in on George and Fred, so she went to Diagon Alley anyway. This was proved a bad idea when a dozen black-robed figures apparated into the middle of the alley. Naturally, Hermione's first thought, being a sane adult witch, was to apparate away very fast. No dice. A swipe of her wand told her there was an anti-apparition ward in place. Hermione's second thought was to run away, as everyone else was doing, but her third thought was that was stupid. She could just call Dobby to get her out of here. But just as she was about to call him, she heard something that made her blood run cold. A man's voice calling out, "Commotio cordis!" followed by a scream. In what was probably her most foolish move since the Department of Mysteries, she drew both of her wands and ran towards the danger. Only a couple of shops over she saw them, a piggish-looking wizard in black robes looming over a young woman lying prone on the ground, while a boy of 4 cowered behind her. "Wow, that really does the wizard started. "Confrigo!" Hermione's curse took him by surprise, smashing through his cursory shield and knocking him down long enough for her to run up and check on the witch on the ground. It was obvious the heart-stopping curse had struck true. She pointed her other wand at the woman's chest and cast, "Defibrillosis!" The Death Eater quickly recovered and approached her again. She fought back with a 2-wanded string of "Protego, Dridristab, Ossificans!" The shotgun curse was a lovely shield breaker she'd found, and the ossifying curse struck home and fused all the bones in the man's wand arm together. "Commotio cordis!" another voice screamed. "Swinger!" Hermione cast on instinct and turned to see her own deadliest curse blink through the first layer of her double shield, but splash harmlessly off the second. Then she saw Bellatrix Lestrange standing over her, grinning. "Oh, so that's how you block it," she said. Damn it, she'd just given the secret away, she thought. Although, if Bellatrix knew how to cast it, it wouldn't be that hard to figure out anyway. But what could she do now? "Crucio!" Hermione dodged. She fired off as many curses as she could think of while keeping her shields up, but Bellatrix Lestrange wouldn't be taken down as easily as the other one. Hermione nearly turned and ran, but she had to protect the woman and the child. "Bellatrix!" one of the other Death Eaters called. The witch turned, and he made an unidentifiable gesture. Hermione felt a shiver go up her spine as Bellatrix scowled and turned back to Hermione and said, "Until next time, Mudblood," and she apparated away. Hermione was confused for a moment, but soon the pieces fell into place. A full frontal assault in broad daylight in the middle of Diagon Alley would be a strategic disaster. It would kill a lot more purebloods than Muggleborns. It would reveal the Death Eaters as nothing more than mass-murdering psychopaths. And she'd lay odds that it would galvanize the wizarding public against them. But now the Death Eaters weren't mounting a full frontal assault. They were already apparating away before the Aurors even showed up, and the reason was obvious. A pitched battle hadn't been their plan at all. It was a simple terror attack to mark the day. When the dust cleared, the damage was fairly light. The Death Eaters had thrown a few curses around, done the equivalent of firebombing a handful of shops, and left. It wasn't hard to guess that those shops were owned by Muggleborns. Hermione checked the woman she'd run to save to make sure she was actually alive. She was. That was good. She kicked herself for being so reckless. She was extremely lucky that hadn't gone a lot worse, especially against Bellatrix. With the woman apparently stable, she looked up the street to Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. George and Fred weren't Muggle-born, but they were blood traders, and with a giant "You-know-poo" sign in the window, she was worried. But when she spotted the store, she laughed. The entire shop front was bristling with rockets, threatening anyone who dared attack them with colorful explosions to the face. Well, at least they were probably all right.
What happened?
The woman was stirring.
A Death Eater tried to kill you.
With my curse, Hermione thought.
Alfie?
She asked.
Mummy!
The little boy cried, wrapping his arms around her neck.
Oh, thank Merlin you're all right. Thank you so much. You're welcome,
Hermione said.
You'll want to go to St. Mungo's to get your heart checked, but you should be fine.
The woman nodded, then her eyes grew wide.
You're her!
She gasped.
Excuse me? You're Hermione Granger. Yes, you've heard of me? Miss Granger, every Muggle born in England has heard of you. Oh, where are my manners? My name's Mary Cattermole. Thank you so much for saving Alfie and me. If there's ever any way I can help you...
Hermione gave only a perfunctory answer. Her focus was preoccupied by looking back where Bellatrix had stood, fruitlessly asking herself a single question. How?
Professor Snape, how...
Rookwood, Snape said.
What?
Rookwood was an unspeakable Granger.
He knows how to reverse engineer spells. You were calling your attacks rather blatantly at the Department of Mysteries. Oh my God, I never thought...
An appallingly common error, even from the most intelligent students, Snape replied. Hermione was silent. She'd come to Snape as soon as she could the day after the attack, looking for answers, but she was horrified to hear them. One more blunder that was her fault. She'd saved Mary Cattermole, yes, but there had been other victims yesterday, including one wizard who had fallen to her curse. "How is your non-verbal spellcasting, Miss Granger?" Snape asked.
It's coming along well, Professor. I'll need a lot of work to get the stronger curses down, though.
"See that you do," he replied. "Even that isn't proof against an unspeakable with a pensieve, but it will make Rookwood's job much harder. In the meantime, keep an eye out for any of the Death Eater's secret weapons that can be used against you. You have the mind to do reverse engineering of your own. Use it."
Yes, Professor," she said meekly. Professor, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. Something I was already planning to ask,"
Snape replied, his impatience showing through.
"I had some questions about the unforgivable curses, specifically about blocking them."
Snape narrowed his eyes at her. "There isn't much to tell, Miss Granger," he said. "The unforgivable curses cannot be blocked by any magical shield, with one obvious exception."
Harry, she thought. "Is that actually proven, Professor?"
she asked. "If you mean arithmetically, then no, but no one has succeeded in blocking them despite centuries of trying, and whole classes of shield spells have been ruled out as possibilities." Which still wasn't proof, she noted. If she could reverse engineer the killing curse enough to find another way to block it, it would be a big help for the Horcrux problem.
"What about a physical shield, though? Those block the unforgivables, right?"
"Yes."
"Does that still apply if you're physically touching it? Is it possible to carry a shield strong enough to block the killing curse?"
Snape raised an eyebrow. "In principle, yes, but it would require an impractically thick and heavy shield, even if it was solid steel. And if you wanted to make it a breastplate worn closer to the body, then the problem would be even worse."
"So a suit of armor wouldn't work, then?"
"Certainly not. It was designed in the medieval period when they were commonly worn."
"All right, then."
She smiled slightly.
But what would you say if I had a shield that was 10 times stronger than steel and a quarter of the weight?"
"I'd say you were delusional," he said without missing a beat. Hermione smiled wider and reached into her handbag. The handbag she had recently enchanted with an undetectable extension charm, and pulled out a disc of dark gray metal nearly a foot wide and a quarter-inch thick, and certainly too large to actually fit in the handbag.
"Miss Granger, where did you get that bag?" Snape asked suspiciously. "Ask me no questions, I'll tell you no lies, Professor."
Wow, it felt good not actually having to answer to him. No, it wasn't strictly legal, but it wasn't like anyone enforced that rule.
"Now, what do you make of that?"
She handed him the disc. Snape examined her rudimentary shield methodically, testing its weight, rapping his knuckles against it, and trying to bend it before casting spells on it. When he did, he got a funny look on his face and threw it on the floor, casting more destructive spells. He looked genuinely surprised when piercing, gouging, and blasting curses that would have shattered a steel plate of that size only scratched it. He summoned it back, and cast yet more spells that she vaguely recognized as scanning for magic before turning back to her.
"What is this miracle material, and where did you get it?" he said. "Diagnostic charms suggests it's very similar to graphite, and yet it's somehow stronger than diamond with no magical reinforcement. In fact, stronger than any other substance I've seen besides goblin silver." "The charm is correct, Professor. It's a graphite-like material recently invented by Muggles. I just used magic to refine the production process a bit."
"Muggles?" Snape said in disbelief.
"I keep more abreast of the Muggle world than you might think, Miss Granger, and I've never even heard of an impossibility like this." "I refined the production process a lot," Hermione corrected. She used her occlumency when she looked at him, just in case. No sense in letting that secret out. "It's not in commercial use yet. Only Muggle scientists have produced it so far, but the principles are simple." He scanned the nanotube plate a few more times. "I find myself believing you," he said. "If only because of the physical evidence. Once again, it seems you've exceeded all rational expectations, Miss Granger. I would have expected work like this perhaps from Dumbledore, more likely from Flamel himself, or from the goblins. I wouldn't even know how to measure the strength of goblin silver. Nothing is truly indestructible, but theirs is near enough. But even if this isn't as strong, it's so much lighter." He paused and regarded her for a minute. "You must be very trusting to show this to me," he said. "Professor Dumbledore trusts you," she said. "I don't always agree with him, but I trust his judgment. You're the only person I could reasonably ask about this, and even if you did show that to Voldemort, I'm confident he wouldn't be able to replicate it."
"Do not speak the Dark Lord's name," Snape hissed.
"Why am I the only person you could talk to?"
She took several more discs from her handbag to show him.
"I have different thicknesses of plates here," she said. "I want to know if that material can stand up to the unforgivable curses, especially the killing curse."
"Ah, and do you want me to test them for you?"
You're the only person I know who would be able and might be willing," Hermione said carefully.
"I see.
"And what do you intend to do with it if I agree?" "I was thinking a shield I could strap to my forearm that I could use when I don't have room to dodge spells. I want it to be able to reliably block one killing curse if it's not too unwieldy."
Snape hefted the disc again and considered it carefully.
"You should never rely on a shield to stop an unforgivable curse," he said. "That said, it may very well be possible with this material. Let me see your other plates."
She handed them to him, and he looked them over too.
"I will test these, in private, and inform you of the results," he said. "Consider it a favor in the interest of the war effort." "Thank you, Professor," she said in relief. "You will tell no one. It would not be good if I were found to be involved in a project this potentially game-changing." "I understand, sir."
Hermione was vaguely aware that Quidditch was still going on this year. She at least made the time to go to the Gryffindor-Slytherin match. Ginny was on the team this year as a new chaser, along with a third-year girl named Demelza Robbins. Peeks and Coot were the new beaters from last year, and Ron had narrowly beat out Cormac McLagan for the keeper, much to everyone's relief. She remembered McLagan from her time at Hogwarts. He was an arrogant arse who thought he was God's gift to witches. She supposed she should have been paying more attention given that Quidditch was such an important part of Harry's life, plus the whole being banned thing from last year, but she just couldn't get into it, especially after the attack 2 days ago. As much as she tried to focus on the game, she found her mind wandering to any of a half-dozen different subjects, and wishing she'd brought something to take notes. She should really load up her handbag with more useful things like that. Ron did seem to be on his game today, as far as she could tell. Hermione didn't see him let any shots through, although she wasn't paying enough attention to keep track of all of them. Lee was gone, she remembered sadly. Though he would have graduated anyway, they would never again hear his unique brand of commentary. Some Hufflepuff boy she didn't really remember was at the microphone instead, and from what she could tell, he didn't much like Gryffindor. She was snapped out of her thoughts about advanced topology when one of the Slytherin players collided, with Harry nearly knocking him off his broom. She screamed in fear, but Harry quickly righted himself, and not a minute later he caught the snitch. It was only when the game was over that she noticed Malfoy wasn't playing. Was he in the room of requirement again? What was he doing in there? They still had no idea, despite Harry trying to tail him every chance he got. Malfoy was just too slippery. Hermione was shocked when, just after the game ended, Ginny collided with the commentator's box. She claimed it was an accident, but Hermione knew she was too good a flyer for that to be true. She didn't think that Hufflepuff boy would be commentating again. She wandered down to the pitch to congratulate her friends, only to find someone had already beat her to it, in Ron's case. As soon as they were out of sight of the teachers, Parvati Patil literally jumped on Ron and was snogging him for all she was worth. When had that happened? Those two had had a rocky relationship for 2 years. Had they finally made it official? Hogwarts changed fast when she wasn't looking. Maybe someday, when she wasn't fighting a war, she'd have a normal life again.